All right. One person waiting. Amanda, 17, 18, 19, 18. Yes, including me. All right. We are all here. So I'm probably going to have to send you all a new link. I'm going to erase this repeating Zoom meeting and send you a new link because I was not able to make a whole lot of changes. I thought I did, but obviously you all had to come into the waiting room again. So I want to remove that, and there's a couple of other things I want to change on that. So I'll send you a new link. Today we are talking about really chapter 4 and a whole number of other chapters in our vascular book, but in the abdomen book, it's chapter 4. And we'll go into anatomy and function a little bit more than your abdomen book. But this is the fun stuff here. I like dealing with vascular, and ironically, I don't really like vascular exams that much. I don't dislike them, but everyone thinks that's my thing, and it's not. But today, and guys, stop me if you have any questions, if you have any, whether it's about class, whether it's about school entirely. Don't be afraid to let me know that you've missed something. Oh, the other thing is I've not been able to, I uploaded to YouTube. I was not able to do any kind of manipulation of the video. So this time around, I'm just going to try to be a little more careful about making sure that you guys are all on board with this. But this will, of course, be also go up to YouTube as well after we are done. A lot of discussions behind the scenes on what does it mean for attendance, what is it, everything. So the fact that you're all here right now, as I currently understand it, means that you have attendance for both this class and lab, which we're actually, of course, not technically doing. And there's Melissa and Pablo and corporate are going around in circles. Corporate somehow thinks that we could do lab remotely, which tells me they don't really understand us too much, but that's okay. We understand us. All right. Well, I'm just gonna, without any objections, I'm just gonna jump on in. All right, so I want to start with some really basic understanding of how veins and arteries differ and how they're built. I drew this earlier simply because, let's get you out of the way here. Simply because circles are remarkably hard to draw on this screen here. Every vessel, I shouldn't say that. Every larger vessels, until we get down to arterioles, venules, and then of course capillaries. But the larger vessels, all the other vessels, are going to have 3 basic layers to them. And what I've drawn here is I have an artery here and a vein over here. You notice that the artery is, of course, round. And that's typically what we're going to find. If you find a vessel in cross section, which was what we're looking at here, and it's perfectly round, the chances of it being a artery are very good, unless we're making someone laugh during a carotid exam and their jugular vein gets all round and big. But that notwithstanding, round structures, round vessels are generally arteries. So the outermost layer is the tunica. Tunica just is Latin or something for coat. Adventitia. That's the outermost layer, basically from here to here. That layer is mostly elastic. Ooh, that spells elastic there, folks. All right. Then we get to a middle layer here, and that is going to be also a tunica. But that is going to be the tunica media. That layer is mostly muscle. Then we go the innermost layer. I can't get too relaxed here. And we have the tunica intima, the innermost layer. And then I'll add one thing. The tunica intima, well, actually, tunica intima, that too is somewhat elastic. Oh my gosh. Well, that spells elastic once again. But the very innermost layer of cells of either of these vessels is the endothelial layer. That's just the innermost layer of cells. And of course, I drew some red blood in here because it's an artery. Oh, one other thing I do want to mention. Arteries and veins don't feed themselves from the blood supply that is inside of their lumen. And so there's not blood, there's not oxygen going from here up to here in order to feed this muscle layer of the tunica media, nor is it going all the way out. It's actually, there are blood vessels that travel inside the vessels. So the vessels have vessels, strangely enough. And of course, there'll be blue ones for veins as well. These are called the vasa vasorum. That's important to note that, you know, that not only are these vessels alive, but if we were to draw what really happens, oh my, I need to get this a little smaller here. What really happens with plaque, and I know I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Plaque does not grow on the wall. It grows in the wall. And so if we were to kind of draw that out a little bit, and let's just fill this with, well, we'll make the whole plaque gray here. That endothelial layer, that innermost layer, is still intact, going around the outside of that plaque. And the other thing to realize then is that, not quite as red as I thought it was going to be, but the vasa vasorum does feed the plaque. Plaque is alive. It is not it's not like plaque on your teeth. It is actually living material. Okay, so moving along, tunica adventitia outside, tunica media, tunica intima on the inside. Same thing with the veins. The larger veins have a tunica adventitia, media, and intima as well, but they are, at least the adventitia has less elasticity, or I wouldn't say less elasticity, but less material to it. The muscular layer is much smaller in veins, and for that reason, veins are very compressible. So when you see a vascular structure that seems to be crushed under the weight of everything else around it, it is most likely a vein. Okay. Stop me if you need me to stop. Now, I'm going to quickly draw in and then erase. Oh, I hope I'm on the right layer. Yeah. I'm going to quickly draw in and then later erase a couple of organs here. Now, the first is going to be simply oh my gosh, that is probably the worst heart ever, but I'll take it. That's okay. That's all that really matters, is that I show something up here. So of course, the aorta is coming out of the heart. That's something I think we all know. The heart does lay really on its side with its apex pointing towards the patient's or the person's left, and the right side of the heart, well, is really laying down here and the top of it. Yes.
Ali's
Hi.
trying to get what she can.
I thought everyone. Hi, what happened to you? Oh, that's right, because one of you had 2 accounts earlier for some reason. I'm so sorry. All right, let me move this chat over. Okay. So the heart lays on its side like this. The aorta does come out up, and then behind the heart, like I said, this is really poorly drawn. And then we have an opening here on the right atrium. This is right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. And that hole in the atrium is where the IVC is going to come in. So the inferior vena cava. We're not talking about the IVC today, though. We're sticking with arteries. So let me move up a little bit. Okay, we want to draw a couple of other organs here. Let's do the first one. It's going to be, you might recognize this. It's the liver. And then a kidney, I'm going to draw it into the liver because it sits behind. Whoop, that's an ugly kidney. Kidney, let's see, right kidney. And then over on the other side, we have a similar organ looking like a liver, but smaller, hopefully, is a spleen. And then also a kidney kind of sits a little bit behind it as well. And you notice that the left kidney is higher up in the body. It's more superior in the body than the right kidney. And that's mainly because the spleen is not as large as the liver. And so the kidney on this side has to grow down. Oh, there's one other organ I just want to quickly draw in, and then I'm going to erase all these organs so they don't get in our way. And that organ, with its tail going all the way and touching the hilum of the spleen. The hilum is an area where vessels are going in and out. It's kind of the doorway. And this is the pancreas there. Okay. So I drew in earlier the diaphragm. Remember the diaphragm is bilobed really, and with the right lobe being slightly more elevated than the left, really for two reasons. One, you have the large liver here pushing up on it, and for two, most of the heart is over here, over in this area, pushing down on this side. So they're a little bit lopsided. All right, but now let's get into the vessels. This is an abdominal study, so I'm not going to label up here, but let's just quickly talk about what we have up here. Actually, the very first arteries off of the aorta as it comes out, this is the aortic root, this area is the root, are the coronary arteries. And just like the vessels, the heart doesn't feed itself from the inside. It does have to be fed from arteries on the outside of it. So these are the coronary arteries. So when you say don't have a coronary, this is what you're referring to. You don't want those clogged up. And of course, we have the ascending aorta here, the arch, and then the descending thoracic. Let me write that here. Aorta. That means it's still in the thorax. The moment it goes through the diaphragm is now the abdominal aorta. Okay, so let's talk about that in a little more depth. And I am going to, I guess I'm just going to go downhill, starting with this vessel right here. I'm just going to work my way all the way down to the last vessel, perhaps the iliac arteries all the way at the bottom. The first vessel, I will mention, you don't have to really know this, but I will simply mention that technically speaking, the very first vessels that come out of the abdominal aorta are the phrenic. Whoops, P. And phrenic refers to the diaphragm. So on either side there's a phrenic artery. You don't have to really know that because you're never going to see it in ultrasound. So in fact, let's just make it all go away. Now, the first vessel that we are concerned about is all of 1 centimeter in length. Approximately, there are some differences between people, but it's generally about 1 centimeter in length. This entire vessel right here in this area is the celiac axis, also known as the celiac trunk. So let's just write celiac axis, or trunk with a C. That's C-E-L-I-A-C, celiac axis. That is the first. And what it does is, well, it creates a, it's a trunk. It's like a tree trunk. And what comes off of that is 3 vessels. There's actually only 2 vessels shown here. I will draw in the third momentarily. The first is going to be going off in this direction and then splitting as it feeds a vessel there, or it feeds an organ over here. And this is why I drew the spleen in before. This is the splenic artery. I have the hardest time with the letter A with this. The splenic artery comes off to this side, and obviously it's named the splenic artery because it's feeding the spleen. I will also say that in reality, it's also feeding, has little branches that come off to feed the stomach, little branches that come off this way to feed the pancreas. Remember, the pancreas came across and its body and tail came all the way over and touched the hilum. This would be the hilum area of the spleen. We don't have to worry so much about the names of these little vessels coming off, but just know that they are there. Off in this direction, we have another vessel going off. Let's see, let's draw that. And there's a branch that we have to know about right here. Oh, that's horrible. Okay. And this is why I drew the liver in before. So we have the hepatic artery. Here's the right hepatic artery. And I'll just over here, I'll just do left. Left hepatic artery. This hepatic artery here, or this branch, I should say, is a hepatic artery proper. I'm sorry, forgot for a moment. We do not worry about the word proper hepatic artery. Oh my gosh, so bad. I'm just going to put hepatic artery dash P, hepatic artery proper here. And that's from the split from that section from there to there. This actually makes this the hepatic artery C4 common. Hepatic artery common from here to there. The vessel that comes off, and there's other vessels that come off, but this is the only one that we're really going to worry about. I want to make this a nice little circle here because we're going to see this artery in the head of the pancreas. This is called the gastroduodenal artery. And in the head of the pancreas, if the pancreas was shown right here, we would see on the anterior surface of the head, we would see a little circle. And once again, it's a circle because it's an artery. It holds its shape. I did mention that there was one other vessel that I had to add in here. It's not shown. And that comes off, right about here. There's always a little bit of changes or differences between people, but it comes off and that generally goes superior, more cephalad, and then takes a turn. And this is actually called the left gastric artery. Left gastric artery, and obviously that's going to be feeding the stomach. There's actually a right gastric artery that comes back to the hepatic artery. Well, it comes off the hepatic artery, and the left and the right meet each other in the middle. but I am not going to draw that. It's not necessary for us, but we can see this left gastric artery feeds the stomach, oh, and also the esophagus as well. As we move down, we have another artery. This artery comes off not really more than a centimeter away from the celiac trunk. This artery does not have any branches, at least not initially though, and it travels really in a very straight line at first, right down anterior to the aorta. That's driving me crazy. Let me use a little computer magic to draw this. Okay. It's going to come down. It sits above the aorta a couple of centimeters, comes straight down, and then it veers off to the patient's right side. This artery is the superior mesenteric artery. And as it's coming off to this side, it's feeding the ascending colon. It comes around, it feeds the transverse colon, and it feeds basically the right side of the intestinal tract. Ooh, yeah, I know I spelled that wrong, but I don't care. Okay, it's a superior mesenteric artery. Comes down, feeds mostly the right, the ascending, and transverse colon. I'm going to skip these other two for a second and come down to this guy. This is the inferior mesenteric artery. And that guy doesn't follow the aorta like the SMA does. It pretty much immediately goes off in this direction, and it feeds some transverse colon, so I'll include that as well. Transverse colon. Descending colon. And rectum. And basically more or less the left side of the intestines. Now I'll mention, they're not called superior intestinal arteries or superior or inferior intestinal arteries. They're called mesenteric arteries for a reason. In our other class, we're going to be talking about mesentery tomorrow. And the mesentery is the scaffolding that holds everything together. So these arteries and veins travel inside the mesentery before getting to the colon, the intestines, and such. And so that's why they're called mesentery arteries. Let me know if I'm losing anyone here. I'm going to have to erase a little bit of stuff here. Didn't really think all of this through. Okay. Okay. As you might guess, there was another organ I drew, a pair of organs next to the spleen and next to the liver, or even a little bit inferior and behind. And we'll just kind of have a couple of little branches there at the end, at the hilum of the kidney. So this is the left renal artery. And then the right. And the left renal artery does tend to be slightly higher than the right because the kidney is slightly higher on that side. And then we usually draw this artery kind of going, dipping down, and then maybe back up, and we'll give it a couple of branches here at the end. And of course, now this is the right renal artery, the right renal artery. Did I succeed? Yes, I drew the right renal artery dipping down. Arteries, when the body can help it, 9 times out of 10, arteries go behind veins. Arteries are heavier, they could handle the weight. Veins are weak, they cannot handle the weight. And so this renal artery is actually dipping down behind the IVC and then goes over to the kidney. The right renal artery is longer. If we were in class and I could pick on someone, I would pick on someone and say, why is the right renal artery longer? Well, it's because the aorta is on the left side of the body. Didn't mention that before, I'm mentioning it now. The aorta is just to the left of the spine. The IVC is just to the right of the spine. So if my IVC is more or less, over here, just imagine I'm drawing an entire IVC, and then spine is in the middle in between those. Okay. So let's see, right renal artery, left renal artery. I'm not going to extend these guys just yet, but I will mention them since they are there. These are also more or less anterior lateral arteries. And these are actually gonadal, which is a little strange if you think about it. What are gonadal veins? In other words, testicular arteries, ovarian arteries. What are they doing all the way up here when the gonads are all the way down in or outside of the pelvis? And what actually happened in development is the gonads started development up here, and they migrated down. And when they migrated down, they brought the artery and actually the vein with them. It's interesting because other vessel or other organs migrate, but they don't take their vessels with them. The kidneys actually migrate, but you don't typically find renal arteries that are tortuous and very long. They tend to be short, and they take the shortest route. Okay, so let me just recap here. We started with, you know what? This is how we're going to recap too. Actually, rather than recap, we'll just mention these guys down here. These are the right and left iliac arteries. They, of course, branch to feed the pelvis and the legs. Okay, now we will recap, and I have some other things I want to draw here. 135. Okay. What am I doing? I want to take this opacity down. Give a nice red. Okay. Red. So what I'm filling in here, as we recall, is the splenic artery. Obviously, its main function is to feed the spleen, but it also has branches going into the stomach and branches that drop down go into the pancreas, which is right posterior to this vessel. There's our splenic artery. Then we jumped over to the other side. We had the hepatic artery. It's the common hepatic artery at this point. And then as it passes this artery coming off, branching off.
Sorry, sir, can you let JP in, please?
Hi, jump ball. Yeah, I'll definitely fix that for next time, guys. Welcome back, JP. So the hepatic artery common over here. And then as it crosses over here, it becomes the hepatic artery proper. No one calls it the hepatic artery proper out in the field. It's simply hepatic artery, but just so we know. The right hepatic artery is going off in this direction, and the left takes a sharp turn here. The vessel that dives down right here is the gastroduodenal artery. Important for us to know because it's a nice landmark in the head of the pancreas, and we will see a little circle in the head of the pancreas. Going back over here, this is the third vessel. If we see it, it's great. The third artery coming off, and this is hard to see, that's why I say if we see it. This is the left gastric artery coming off in this direction that is feeding the stomach and the esophagus. As we come down, we found the SMA here. And that SMA comes off, and I'm going to show you a different perspective of all this. As that SMA comes off, the aorta, it follows the aorta for a while and then takes a sharp right-hand turn to feed the right intestines, the ascending colon, and the first half to 3/4 of the transverse colon. We jumped over to the IMA, and that's doing the same thing. It's feeding, except now the second half of the transverse colon, the descending colon, rectum, and basically the left side. For those of you who don't remember or don't know, the colon, of course, our large intestines, the kind of the end of the road of our intestinal tract. All right, there's something else I wanted to add, but I'll do that later. We have, of course, the left renal artery, the right renal artery, and the iliacs feeding the legs and the pelvis. We will go into iliacs more in detail, both in the OBGYN and then also extremity vascular. So there's one thing I wanted, I guess I'll just show it here. I could draw a whole other picture, but that's too time consuming. Just so you know, and it's just kind of an interesting fact, the superior mesenteric artery, SMA here, if it goes around, it follows up and comes around. As it's coming around, it's actually, this is the route of the transverse colon as it's coming around here. And what it does is it meets, there's lots and lots of branches coming off, but it meets in the middle, or I think a little bit off to the left-hand side. And creates what's known as Y. What's known as a anastomosis, where two vessels, not an artery and a vein, but when two arteries come together, it's an anastomosis, and that's what happens here. This vessel comes around, this vessel comes around, they meet in the middle, it's an anastomosis. All right. 141. All right, let me keep you just a little bit longer before break. I'm not letting you go just yet. Now I've drawn out, now this is the anatomical view. This is us looking down. We have X-ray vision. We can see everything as it is. That's not the view we're going to have. In general, in ultrasound, our view is going to be this a little bit more like this. So once again, we have our aorta. Patient's heart is up here, feet are down at the other end. And within a few centimeters of the diaphragm, which I just drew backwards, within a few centimeters, 2 to 3 centimeters of the diaphragm, we have our first vessel. And that, of course, is our celiac axis. Here's our first vessel, not including the pharynx, which we don't care about. But that's all I'm going to draw for it. It is 1 centimeter long. It can aim downward. It can aim somewhat upward. It can be funny shaped. I just drew a generic shape for it right there. Since we're looking at the middle, we now have our transducer sagittal on the body, which means we can't see over here the right renal artery. Oh no. If we're sagittal in the middle here, we can't see the hepatic artery. We can't see the splenic artery. We actually might see a little bit of the left gastric artery. I'll draw that one in. But that's because, of course, we have our transducer right here. This is the view of what we're seeing. That's the plane of what we're seeing. Okay. So, I said I'd draw in that left gastric artery. A lot of times it looks a bit like that, and just kind of, that's all we see of it. It just kind of disappears after that. But for now, I'm just gonna cap this vessel off right here. I'm capping that vessel off because we can't see to the sides. Now, within a short distance, the superior mesenteric artery comes off, and that, like I said, follows the aorta. And then that makes a turn. I don't know how to draw in 3 dimensions, so it's coming towards us, but here I'll draw. this is supposed to be turning off to our direction, but that looks horrible. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. So here's our SMA. And then, we cannot see the renal arteries, but if we could, they'd be coming off, right about there. And then we have, and the gonadals, we generally don't see those at all. They're very small. No pun intended. The next anterior vessel we're going to see is the IMA. This is very difficult to see. It comes off and then it disappears pretty much immediately. It goes off to the other direction. So the SMAs, from our perspective, this SMA is going to turn towards us. This IMA is turning away from us. And of course, we have the left and right iliac vein and artery there. Oh, incidentally, since I've made such a big deal, and this is the last point before I let you go for break. Incidentally, I made a big deal about the crus of the diaphragm. And here it is. It is a hypoechoic line anterior to the aorta. And a little clue, it sometimes comes too close to the celiac trunk. And I actually have a student from last semester who this did indeed come too close. And every time she would take a deep breath in and then let it out, her celiac trunk would become entrapped by basically the very bottom of the crus. It's called the median ligament, median arcuate ligament. And so she had a bit of a syndrome, but that is for another day as well. All right. It is, for all intents and purposes, 1:50. Let's take a break until 2:10. I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat something. Well, let's take a break until 2:10. I'll see you guys back. Okay. So we actually don't have a lot more to talk about today. This is actually a pretty good amount of material, and I'm really glad I'm glad I've gotten through it. I don't know if you've gotten through it all right. But what else did I want to say? Oh, so we are trying to figure out the whole attendance thing. Obviously, you're all here. I'll clock you all in. Hopefully, we don't have to, because I don't want to, Melissa doesn't want to, but hopefully we don't have to do anything above and beyond for a lab right now as far as getting you to do things. I did post a couple of videos. Both of them are tutorials. Both of them are from doctors, so they scan like doctors. Doctors don't scan like techs because they don't have to. But they're both I thought they were very good, and I strongly encourage you to watch those videos on your own time.
Excuse me, Kurt.
Yeah.
Can you let her go, please?
Yeah. Okay. And by the way, guys, I now have I keep yesterday I kept my phone on silent. Today, it's not on silent, and it's right in my field of view. So you could text me as well. I won't miss it this time around. But yeah, so I think our days are going to tend to be a little bit on the short side. We are going along at a pretty good pace, and so I'm happy with that. If I feel like we're falling behind, then our days will be a little bit longer. But we're going to try to keep it relatively short. Gosh, not this short. This is too short. But so what I do have is a couple of new drawings. Both of these I have seen in our lab. But let me start actually, not the new drawing. I'm going to start with this little circle right here. And the reason I want to draw this is we cannot see all of this, all of, everything here with one picture or with one scan in ultrasound. It's really not possible. So we have to think about what we actually see in ultrasound. And what we actually see is often very different than the pretty pictures you see in books or on the internet. But sometimes we do get a pretty good idea of how things are built. And so if this were a cross-section of the aorta, right at this point, if we had a cross-section, we might be able to see the celiac axis coming off. And I draw it a little squirrely because oftentimes it is a little tortuous, even though it's a very short artery. Oops, you know what? That's a cross section. Okay. Okay. So once again, CT for celiac trunk or CA for celiac axis, either works fine. If we can see this at this point, we might be able to see a structure like this. And so think about that. If we're over here and we got our transducer transverse on the body, we should be able to see what's called, well, sometimes we call this the seagull sign. There's a lot of times the shape is a little more, like when you're a kid and you wanted to draw seagulls, you would draw them like that. Well, a lot of times that's actually what it kind of more or less looks like. I made these arteries a little flat, but that's okay. So that's a cross section there. Actually, let me draw another cross section of the aorta right below this level, and I'm going to draw this little circle right there. Now I am cross section right here on the aorta. If you're cross section there, you're going to see the SMA in cross section and transverse, and the aorta in transverse. So once again, perfect circle. The SMA actually, and I don't really understand why, is surrounded by a lot of connective tissue, a lot of fat. So the SMA always has a halo of echogenicity around it. And that's one way we're able to determine whether or not it is actually the SMA. So these are two views that are somewhat required. I wouldn't say required on a general abdomen exam, but if you're doing a vascular exam, if you're doing an arterial exam of the aorta, these would be good images to have. Okay. Now, these other two pictures I've drawn are kind of interesting. Let's go back to the original. By the way, these are basically not so much the hepatic artery, but it's there simply because it's attached. These vessels here are the mesenteric vessels, the mesentery. And what was my point? Oh, there is a lot of variability. This is the standard. When we look off in this direction here, we see the splenic artery. When we look off in this direction here, we see the hepatic artery. And if we look generally more up and then over like this, we see the left gastric artery. And then just below, sometimes even a shared trunk, but usually just below, coming off in this direction, is the superior mesenteric artery. It's superior, of course, because it's not the inferior. But that's not the only way. Now, both of these I've had students with in the last 2 semesters. 2 semesters ago, I had a student with this configuration. So what we have is, yes, it's a hepatic artery coming off the celiac axis here, and it has its gastroduodenal artery coming down, but it only has a left branch or left hepatic artery. The right hepatic artery is what's called, try that again. The right hepatic artery is what's called replaced. So this person has a replaced right hepatic artery. Not a big deal. These are not terribly uncommon. And it's something if you notice it, it's worthwhile mentioning. This is actually very hard to notice if you're not looking for it. It should be noticed, however, if you're doing a workup for someone who's going to have a liver transplant or other kind of major liver surgery, because you do want to tell the surgeon in advance, hey, this person has 2 hepatic arteries going to the liver, a replaced right hepatic artery and the regular hepatic artery. Now that was 2 semesters ago. That one's not too uncommon. This next one is pretty uncommon. And actually really interesting. So let's just jump here. We have and I don't even know exactly how to name these. We have the celiac called trunk is here. We have our left gastric artery there. We have our splenic artery here. And then essentially, I guess in retrospect, I wouldn't call this a second celiac trunk. It's just simply the hepatic artery common. So hepatic artery common, and of course this would drop off a gastroduodenal artery and go up and split into right and left hepatic artery. So basically, we used to tease her and say that she didn't have the seagull sign. She basically had two separate one-winged seagulls that couldn't fly. She had a seagull with just a left wing and a seagull with just a right wing. And here's our SMA down here I drew in. So those are things to be aware of. Oh, and if we were to draw her over here, she basically had something that looked more or less like I'm just going to cap that one off as well because it takes a sharp turn towards us. We can't see that. This one's taking a sharp turn away from us. So my student from last semester, I taught this. She had basically a celiac trunk, almost like a second celiac trunk, and then the superior mesenteric artery. Okay. Some other things I want to mention. Well, really only a couple. I got to think about this. Well, we could do a little review on this as well. Let me go ahead and zoom in. All these vessels, of course, at the very beginning, I drew in a liver and a kidney and a spleen and another kidney. And I could have drawn in a whole colon going around, starting over here, working its way around and going down to here and then over to the rectum. But obviously it gets a little messy if I draw that in. But my point being is that nothing in here is by itself. Everything is pushed up against something else. Everything is affects something else. And no exception to the superior mesenteric artery. Now, we are going to talk about veins later, and we're going to start putting more of this together later. But as you know, the aorta runs down the left side of the body. The IVC, inferior vena cava, runs down the right side of the body. Both of them are very close to each other, but they are on opposite sides of the body, on opposite sides of the spine. If you remember, I drew this little circle in. This was indicating basically the location of the renal artery as it's coming out. It's actually a little higher, but that's okay. Well, if a renal artery is coming out, this one's coming towards us. So the kidney is in space between you and your video screen. Well, that means a vein has to be going back. That, you know what? Let me say it differently. There is a renal artery coming towards us, but there's a renal artery going away from us as well. The one going away from us from this perspective is going to be the left renal artery. Coming back is the left renal vein. That renal vein has to cross over. And it's going to cross over right there. We'll fill it with a little bit of blue blood. And it's usually quite flattened. Well, it's flattened because it's between two arteries. It's going over the aorta, under the superior mesenteric artery. That causes potentially a problem. It's called the nutcracker syndrome. If the pressure is too strong between those two, let's see, there's my renal artery is over here. It's on blue, right? Yeah. If my vein is coming from my kidney, comes across, and then gets crushed right here. Of course, venous flow is going back towards the heart, so it's going in that direction. I could have quite a large vein suddenly get crushed down to nothing. And what it does actually happen like this, I've seen this quite a few times, usually in thinner people. People are not always symptomatic, but they can be. We now have a very large vein here and then a wispy remnant of a vein. I'll go ahead and kind of draw it through there, going across, and then it opens up again and eventually finds the IVC over on that side. So when this happens, it's called the there's a C, isn't there, right? A nutcracker, nut. How does one spell cracker?
I think there's
Yeah,
a Q in there.
Oh, shut up. Yeah, I can always depend on you. The nutcracker or nutcracker syndrome. And this can cause a number of problems. The worst problem it can cause is actually venous hypertension going back to the kidney. That really affects the kidney's ability to do its job, and that is not something we want to see happen. And it can cause another problem as well. I'll just get rid of this just because it's ugly. I don't want to get into the other problems it can cause. Oh, won't let me go any farther. Because I don't want to get into the other problems it causes, because there's a little more anatomy we have to talk about before we get to that point. Oh, right. The other thing I want to mention is underneath this SMA, well, all along the aorta are little things. We have a whole bunch of lymph nodes that follow the aorta all the way up. Lymph nodes are not always easy to see. I mean, some tissues that we scan, lymph nodes can be very easy to see. Other tissues, not so much. When I see a superior mesenteric artery do something like this, really come off at a very high angle rather than the short or the acute angle that it normally is, I stop and take a second look. Because is it possibly enlarged lymph nodes? Like I said, just because they're enlarged doesn't mean they're easy to see. So that's something I do look for, is what direction is the SMA taking? Is it looking like this, like it should? Or is it coming off at a very high angle? The other possibility is, and I've had 2 students, once again, in the last couple semesters, who've had this issue. The superior mesenteric artery just came off the aorta a little bit low. Well, no big deal, right? Except what also goes underneath is not only the some lymph nodes and the left renal vein. Actually, that was bad. Left renal vein. The other thing that goes underneath here, you wouldn't think it would fit, but it does, is the duodenum. Duodenum is the very first part of our intestines. So the stomach and then the duodenum. The duodenum turns around quickly, comes around, goes underneath the SMA. The SMA is at that point is usually not so tight to the aorta, but that goes in under there as well. Now that's all well and good. Whoop. But if the SMA takes off from the aorta a little bit lower, let's say it starts down here instead of where it should be starting is up here, or the person's whole aorta is shifted down for whatever reason. It's just an anatomical difference. It's no big deal. But I've had 2 students in the last 2 semesters whose SMAs did this. And I kind of freaked out. Well, I didn't freak out visibly. Students don't like that, I've learned. But I have had 2 SMAs do this in the past. And it took me a little bit of scanning, and I even had to run back and Google something and kind of figure out what I was looking at, and came back and I realized that their duodenum was making the SMA do that. And so I kind of looked at their overall body habitus, how they were built, maybe short-waisted. And so I did notice that with them, which was kind of a interesting thing. Let me do something real quick. Print screen. Okay. Well, I tell you what, guys. All right, how about this? Quick review and we're done. I don't have much else to say. If you guys have questions, I would love to hear from you. Okay, thank you. Always come off the splenic or near the trunk. Beautiful question. All right, I've got a question here. The left gastric artery, does it always, I keep drawing it so that it's coming off the, a little bit off the splenic artery. It can come off the trunk, splenic artery, even hepatic artery, but it's always going to be really close into that area. There's a lot, like I said before, lots of variability in this whole area. All right, if anyone else has questions, you can type them or ask them. That is awesome. Let's see. We already did a review up here, didn't we? And this is pretty self-explanatory, other than the fact that, remember, this is a variant, not normal there. Oh, one thing I do want to say is, and it's an exercise that you really do in lab, not so much on a computer here. But I teach my students, oh, okay, just almost missed something else. But I teach my students that if they're dead center on the aorta and they sweep just a little bit to the patient's left, they'll end up seeing a circle. Well, what is that circle? That circle, gotta draw things a little bit better here. That circle is the beam cutting the splenic artery right there. And it's cutting it sideways, transversely, so you're seeing a circle. Same thing, if if we are right here and then we sweep just ever so slightly to the patient's right, we again see a circle. It's like the same circle. In fact, it oftentimes looks identical. But if we're off to the right, then we're cutting off the hepatic artery right there. So that circle then becomes the hepatic artery. The other thing, I'm so glad I saw this. I forgot I drew this in. Can anyone guess what this is? The hypoechoic line anterior to the aorta. Well, no biters.
Say it one more time. I'm sorry.
Sorry. See, hypoechoic line anterior to the aorta. It's actually, and this is why. You guys able to hear me?
Was it the crust?
It's the crust. That's the crust of the diaphragm. The crust of the diaphragm. So remember the diaphragm. Oh, let's just come up here. Here I've drawn the diaphragm, but I've only drawn just a thin section of the diaphragm. This diaphragm, of course, is it's like an upside down bowl. Well, it's actually double lobed. It's more like an upside down bra, I mean, realistically. But the crust of the diaphragm, and there's attachments all along. They attach to the ribs. The ribs, and they attach to the spine. Of course, your spine is over here, and so there are attachments running down. And so what we're seeing, just anterior to the aorta, and it's a crust because it does, these muscle groups, these muscle attachments do cross at this point. And that's what we see. Just anterior to the aorta right there. It's also, and like I said, I had a student just last time I taught this class. She would take a deep breath in. No, I'm sorry, it's a breath out. When she breathed out, this structure would indent her celiac trunk, and suddenly we would see a whole lot of aliasing, and her blood flow would go from about 100. The celiac trunk's pretty fast vessel normally, so it would go from like 130 centimeters per second to, gosh, I think it went all the way up to like 600 centimeters per second when she really breathed out. So this and that is this is considered the let's do a different color. The median arcuate ligament is really a part of that attachment there, and well, that's called MALS, median arcuate ligament syndrome. And she had it. She was not symptomatic, but she definitely had this syndrome, which was pretty interesting. So it must be comforting to know that I will find something on you guys. It's only a matter of time. Let's see. Okay. Okay, given some of the questions I have, I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to come back and just open up last class real quick. Okay, quick review. So we have the crust down here, the celiac trunk. superior mesenteric artery, and of course, all these things can be seen up here as well. It's just two different views. Descending aorta. Oh, by the way, I have the aorta shaped like this for the simple fact that there's lordosis of the back. Everyone's back, hopefully, goes in a little bit, and your aorta is going to come up towards the belly as well. So that's called lordosis of the back. Transverse view from here to there, you will see the aorta in transverse with the SMA anterior to it. SMA is surrounded by echogenic fat and connective tissue. We go just a tiny bit up farther, and we come across right here in transverse, and we see the aorta with a usually somewhat curvy or tortuous celiac trunk, and the seagull sign with both arms of the seagull, or both wings of the seagull pointing out. One's a hepatic artery, the other the splenic artery. Over here, I had a couple of variants that are not at all uncommon. This is a replaced right hepatic artery, and that is coming off of the SMA instead of how it normally would come off, well, as a branch of the regular hepatic artery, which I've drawn up here. The other possibility, this is quite rare, it's not even in the book, but it was on my students, so I'm including it, and that is a completely replaced hepatic artery, not right hepatic artery, but hepatic artery. Common is coming off separately not from the celiac trunk, but separately actually from the aorta itself. So that is another possibility. Okay, let me do something really quick here. Well, if you can't open it, don't. I've got so many things up, I can't even. Okay, hold on. Oh, God, you don't want to see that one yet. Okay. Well, I had some questions about the crus and the diaphragm itself. Remember, so that the diaphragm is the muscular and tendinous structure between the abdominal and thoracic cavities. The abdominal cavity down here. Oh, look at that. That's a little better, hey? The abdominal cavity being down here, the thoracic or chest cavity being up here, and the diaphragm being the separating it. Muscular attachments go all the way around. They attach to the rib. Oh, look at that. I could draw on this too. That's great. They attach along the ribs. They attach along the back, along the ribs, all the way along here, all the way up to the xiphoid bone here. And then also down the spine. And this last one here, oh gosh, how do I erase that? There we go. This last one I'm drawing, this is the crust. This is the right and left crusts. They tend to more or less cross. A lot of the fibers cross over here, which is why it's called a crust, I do believe. But that's the crust of the diaphragm. Yeah, the crust of the diaphragm. What we're not seeing right here is the aorta is traveling down more off to the side here, but the aorta is traveling along here, and that crust is at least partially for some time over the aorta, and that's what we see on ultrasound. Just another quick view. Looking up, as if we are inside the body looking up. Once again, here is the crust. Some of it's kind of crossing around like that. That is the crust of the diaphragm. That is what we were able to see. Oh, you see tiny little phrenic arteries coming out. They included that there. Can I get rid of that? No, I have to erase. And then also, we see a median arcuate ligament. Well, that's really a part of the diaphragm. It's just the more of the tendinous attachment points. And that median arcuate ligament comes across and can cause a problem in some people. Can the crust detach? I don't think so. I think that is so tight in there that if it were to detach, well, can it detach? Yes. And the reason I say that is because, well, this would really be something that would be a from birth. This area over here, the lateral arcuate ligament, this whole triangular area is a weak point. And sometimes we can have a herniation of a spleen or perhaps intestines from the abdominal cavity into the thoracic cavity. So that is a possibility there. Erase. Erase all ink. Oh, that's beautiful. So I would suggest going over yesterday's YouTube. Oh, remember, I will send you a new link for Zoom. I have to totally redo it in order to get rid of the waiting room and some other. Vivian, how'd you get out of there? Sorry, Vivian. Yeah, and so that doesn't happen again. Assignments. Yeah. Let's have assignments due on Fridays. So that means workbook, not the vascular chapter, but chapter 2. Where's my schedule? Oh, today's only Tuesday. Chapters 2 and chapters 3 I want the workbook done. And we're just going to have to take pictures of it and send them to me. So that'll be Friday. I'll go ahead and I'll post that as well.
Kurt, do you want those pictures emailed or texted to you?
I guess email would be better. But if for whatever reason you have to text them, that's fine as well. But I would just end up forwarding them to my own email. Oh, and really weird, I found some emails from you guys in my private email, which was really strange because I know I've never given that out. But I think I opened up Google and I have 2 Google accounts, and so it's somehow they a couple of things bled over to the other accounts, so I have to go through and make sure I didn't miss anything from you guys. Yeah. Any other questions today?
When are we gonna get the final for your classes?
Oh, so I've been talking to Melissa about that, what to do with grades, holding back on some things. And she said, she actually gave me the go ahead this morning to make sure all grades go in. Also, the final. She was saying that corporate is now, first corporate is telling us, well, wait. Now they're saying, no, they want it done. So yeah, that's kind of a big news. I forgot to talk about that entirely. We are going to do it online. Yeah, I'll be posting everything soon. We will be doing it online. There are standards that the Department of Education is telling us that needs to be done, and we will try to follow them as best as we can. Some of them are not. It's just simply not going to happen. But one of the things, a few of the things the Department of Education is basically saying is it's a timed exam. They don't want people at home with hours and hours to spend on taking a test. They're going to want to set it up as you get one question at a time, and there's no going back. And so Melissa and I are pushing back on that because we really don't like the idea that you can't go back. So we're going to see if that's a possibility that we could avoid that. But I do think that the timed test is going to be required. Everyone's going to have to take the test at the same exact time. So literally, if I don't see everyone signed up or everyone online at the same exact time, then the test doesn't get started until everyone is there. But in any case, I think this week. So when you're not reviewing these videos, do some last minute studying. Oh, and let me turn off recording. Well, I think if I hit Control R. Since I lost my other page, I don't know if I'm recording or not. Okay. Well, in any case, why did I want to turn off recording? I was going to say something. Oh, right. Think about this, guys. With a timed test, you're not going to be able to use the book. It takes way too long for you to. I don't care. I honestly don't care if you have the book open, but I'm going to strongly suggest that you don't sit there looking up answers on a timed test. You don't have the chance to do that. What you do have the possibility of doing is, remember, I did allow for like one test. I allowed the use of the little cheat sheet. Definitely have that sitting next to you when you take the final. If there's anything else that you find particularly difficult, any concepts, I don't care, write them down. You know, what are we going to do? So you can go ahead and I would have some notes with you, but like I said, I would not be going through the book because you'll end up not finishing the exam. All right. Anything else?
How
So
many?
really everybody has to be logged in order to take the final.
Yes.
See,
And it has to be during class time. So it'll probably be like 1 o'clock on a Friday or something like that.
Okay.
All right. How long? Yeah. So how many questions? Oh my gosh, I've forgotten how many. It was an odd number because I dropped one and now I gotta drop a second one. It's like 70 questions, 79 questions, 78 questions, something. It's an odd number. So I have to think about what's a fair time. Usually a minute a question. Let's see, 70 minutes. Usually a minute a question is pretty fair. Some questions take longer than a minute. Other questions take less. But it'd be somewhere in the realm of 1 minute per question. Maybe just a little bit longer than that.
2 hours, right?
2 hours. Well, if it's 80 questions, it's 80 minutes approximately. I'll look at that. I want to be fair, but I also want to make sure that we don't and when I say we, I really do mean all of us, get in trouble with Department of Education. They come in and see that they see a lack of attention to detail. Not only do I get in trouble and Melissa gets in trouble, but it could actually it can affect the whole program. So we do have to be careful how we do things. All right.
As far as the homework, you said chapters 2 and 3.
Yes, in the abdomen book. Well, the abdomen workbook. In fact, let me make sure I write that down. Friday. All right. Well, why don't I'll leave it open, but you guys are free to start signing off if you want. I'll probably be ending the meeting in the next few minutes anyway. But everyone take care.
Bye, guys.
Where is my... God's sakes, why don't you stay over there? Oh God, please don't.